The night I discovered the broken lock on my safe, an icy dread hollowed my chest, and every memory of trust I'd once held for my neighbor, Gloria Karen Patterson, shattered like glass. I had known her as the self-appointed enforcer of our community, the one who lectured every homeowner about paint colors and lawn heights, but never once had I imagined she'd stoop to burglary. My heart pounded as I surveyed the sawdust on the carpet and the twisted metal latch, the only clues to her midnight trespass. I'd left the safe door locked tight after depositing the charity checks for the Veterans Home Renovation Fund funds she'd publicly ridiculed me for raising in last month's HOA meeting. Now those checks were gone, and the only trace she left was her brazen signature. A rogue flash drive she'd carelessly dropped in her rush, with a crudely scrawled label, "Proof." I went straight to the one person I'd barely dared to confide in, Agent Maria Delgado of the Federal Crimes Unit, whose office lay in the unmarked building 2 blocks from my house. When I showed her the broken lock and the vanished checks, her eyes narrowed and she whispered, "This is our opening." She explained that Karen's petty HOA vendettas had escalated in recent weeks into a citywide pattern of intimidation, and that someone watching her had tipped off the bureau. The twist came when she revealed the stranger's identity. My own cousin Marcus, who'd gone undercover after Karen targeted his wife's small business with phony fines and menacing letters. He'd been gathering evidence, recording her threats in secret, until the moment she decided to break into her neighbor's safe for material proof of conspiracy. He handed me a hidden microSD card with hours of surveillance footage that captured Karen's heavy silhouette creeping through my back door, her chubby fingers fumbling with my lock, and her triumphant grin when the door finally swung open. With that evidence in hand, we planned our confrontation. Agent Delgado coordinated with local police to stage a community meeting as a pretext, inviting Karen under the guise of fining me for supposed unauthorized security modifications. I stood at the podium in our HOA hall projecting calm, as Karen burst through the double doors, clutching her notes and lacquered nails clicking on the polished floor. I told the assembled board that I'd discovered her illegal entry, and that I intended to press charges. She gasped, cheeks flaming, and sputtered that I was lying, until I stepped aside and Delgado played Marcus's recordings on the projector. The room fell silent as Karen's stifled curses and triumphant laughter echoed off the walls. Her face, once so smug, contorted with fury and humiliation. As she scrambled for an excuse, I delivered the coup de grace. I revealed the federal indictments drafted against her: racketeering, burglary, and fraud, while sliding the stolen charity checks back onto the table. Gasps turned to whispers, and neighbors I'd barely spoken to nodded in stunned approval. The HOA president, previously a toady to Karen's tantrums, stepped forward to revoke her privileges and ban her from all future meetings. Karen's implosion was total. She shrank behind her designer purse, eyes darting for an escape, but every exit felt like walking through the bullseye of her disgrace. In the aftermath, the local news ran the story under the banner "HOA Queen turned criminal queen pin," and I received dozens of messages from veterans and fellow homeowners thanking me for exposing her corruption. Our neighborhood, once fractured by petty squabbles, found unity in standing up to abuse of power. The Veterans Home Fund was restored, bigger than ever, and I used the revived checks to finish the renovations I'd promised. Even Marcus and I reconciled, our bond strengthened by the secret mission that brought down our mutual tormentor. Justice tasted sweet, but I couldn't ignore the lesson woven through every moment of this ordeal. Complacency in the face of small abuses seeds far worse crimes. If one overweight tyrant could break into a safe to prove her dominance, what might she have done next? So I invite you, reader, to weigh the scales. Was my choice to turn my neighbor's betrayal into a federal case an act of heroic defense? Or did I push a petty conflict into a spectacle of vengeance? Share your thoughts, right or wrong, in the comments below. From the moment the courtroom doors clanged shut behind Karen, her eyes darted wildly over the sea of reporters and deputies, each face a reminder that her reign of petty tyranny had ended in spectacular humiliation. The weight of federal charges pressed against her like a vice, but I felt no triumph in her defeat, only a solemn vindication for everyone she'd bullied. As the Veterans Home finally opened its doors, the crisp ribbon cut by the mayor bore my name alongside Marcus's, a testament to our solidarity in the face of corruption. Veterans gathered on the porch, their medals catching the morning light, sharing stories of sacrifice and resilience, and I realized that justice isn't merely retribution but restoration of dignity. Every smile that greeted me felt like a stitch in the tear Karen's crimes had ripped through our community. In the weeks that followed, I spearheaded a neighborhood council dedicated to transparency and mutual respect, drafting bylaws that forbade unauthorized surveillance and enforced strict conflict resolution measures. Marcus volunteered to lead the outreach program, drawing on his undercover experience to teach neighbors about their rights and the importance of evidence preservation. Even the HOA hall, once a den of petty decrees and passive-aggressive memos, was repurposed into a community center where monthly forums encouraged open dialogue. I watched as former adversaries once at each other's throats over hedges and trash cans found common ground in volunteer projects and shared barbecues. The sting operation that brought Karen down became more than a law enforcement triumph. It served as a catalyst for genuine unity. The scars of her betrayal remained, yes, in the form of drilled holes in walls and torn door frames, but those too were transformed, filled, sanded, and painted over by neighbors working side by side, each stroke of brush symbolic of our collective healing. Yet even as life settled into a new rhythm, the echoes of that night when Karen tugged my safe open and unleashed her hubris lingered. Occasionally, I'd catch myself scanning locked drawers and safes at strangers' houses, half expecting to glimpse Karen's silhouette skulking in the shadows. I recognized that paranoia as a byproduct of trauma, and I confronted it by volunteering at the local crisis hotline, offering empathy to callers who felt powerless in their daily lives. My own vulnerability became a bridge toward compassion. Just as Delgado had guided me through the confusion and rage of betrayal, I now guided others through their fears, reassuring them that they didn't have to bear the weight of injustice alone. One afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox, a single sheet of heavy cream paper, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. Inside was an apology from Karen, penned in a shaky scrawl. She admitted her obsession with control had spiraled into criminality, and expressed regret for violating my trust and the community's peace. She wrote of sleepless nights haunted by echoes of the safe's lock snapping, of her own realization that her drive to enforce order had warped into wanton harm. The letter closed with a request, a chance at redemption. I weighed the words, feeling a surge of pity amid the residual bitterness. Ultimately, I drafted a measured response, outlining steps she could take toward restitution: attending anger management counseling, participating in community service, and publicly acknowledging the harm she'd caused. I made it clear that forgiveness didn't erase accountability, but that genuine contrition could pave the way for healing. Karen's sentencing hearing was held in a packed courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Neighbors filled the benches, some wearing pins supporting my fundraiser, others clutching petitions for Karen's rehabilitation rather than incarceration. Delgado, ever the stoic professional, stood by my side as the judge reviewed her pre-sentencing report, which detailed her charitable donations to the very fund she'd sought to sabotage, a gesture perhaps symbol of her conflicted conscience. The judge, acknowledging her remorse and the restorative justice proposals in her letter, sentenced her to probation, mandatory community service repairing the physical damage she'd inflicted, and a requirement to speak at schools about the consequences of abusing power. The gavel fell with finality, and a hush settled before the courtroom erupted into murmurs. I felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation. Would Karen honor her commitments, or would her transformation prove as superficial as her ornate nails? Time would tell. In the months after her release, I noticed subtle changes. She arrived early to our community cleanups, a neon safety vest cinched around her generous frame, her face earnest as she swept walkways and painted over graffiti. She spoke to neighbors she once scorned, her voice softer, her posture less rigid. I attended her first public speech at a middle school assembly, where she confessed her sins and urged students to stand up against injustice before it snowballs into something they'll regret. Watching her through the auditorium door, I felt a cautious hope that people, even those who lose their way, could find redemption when held accountable in a compassionate, structured way. As my own life returned to normal, weekend fishing trips with Marcus, quiet dinners with Maria Delgado recounting inside jokes, the warmth of Sunday gatherings on my renovated porch, I reflected on the nature of power. Karen had wielded her HOA title like a weapon, believing rules meant to guide could be twisted to dominate. Yet when those same rules were applied without fear or favor, they restored balance rather than imposed tyranny. The real victory lay not in her downfall, but in our collective decision to rebuild stronger, more inclusive bonds. I often walk past my old door now, the safe long since moved to a bank's vault, its dented surface a relic of a battle fought and won. The memory of that night remains vivid, but it no longer triggers a freeze of heart or a flash of paranoia. Instead, it reminds me that vigilance, courage, and community solidarity can turn a personal violation into a public revelation, transforming fear into empowerment. Perhaps the greatest twist in this saga wasn't Karen's unexpected break-in, Marcus's undercover bravery, or the federal sting that amassed the evidence. It was discovering that the strongest defenses against corruption are empathy and accountability working hand in hand. When we chose to engage Karen with both firmness and the prospect of redemption, we didn't just stop a criminal, we reclaimed our neighborhood's soul. So, dear reader, as you weigh this story in your mind, consider the choices we make when faced with abuse of power. Should victims seek absolute retribution, or should they build pathways for restoration? Is community stronger when punishment is final, or when redemption is possible? Share your verdict, right or wrong, and let the debate unfold. For only through open discourse can we ensure that no HOA Karen ever breaks trust again.